I'm not convinced that we're seeing young girls dressed up as sexual objects for grown men. I'm not sure that's something that I'm seeing in the media. What we're talking about here is...
Why are we dressing them up?
Why are young girls dressing up?
Why are we as a society dressing children up as women?
Can I jump in here and say, I mean, one of the things I think is frustrating in this debate for me is when you have a good knowledge of cultural history and a comparative knowledge of it. I mean, we go back to the 19th century and the early 20th century, the age of consent was 12. I mean, the majority of working class girls were going into domestic service at the age of 12 or 13. They certainly weren't finishing high school. You know, in other words, if we actually look historically, we saw, you know, pubescence as the age at which people became sexually available. Now, I don't want to go back there. I like the idea that now young women from backgrounds where working class backgrounds, places like where I grew up, finish high school. Fantastic. I don't want them getting pregnant at 15, but that's how it used to be. I think what's happened now is we've extended adolescence to a point where it goes right through to 18, where, you know, and in a sense, if we look at the real problems, things like the sexual abuse of children, if we look at children behaving inappropriately sexually in ways that damage them, I don't think the media's got a lot to do with that. I think that stuff's been going on forever. Where I grew up, there were young girls getting pregnant in the back of panel vans at 13, and there wasn't a lot of popular culture involved. There was a lot of male brutality. And I worry that we're focusing on the wrong things instead of devoting resources and attention to the right issues.
I actually think that's a bit of a red herring in the sense that what we do know is that we're facing a virtual epidemic of child sexual abuse. There's clear evidence, I think, that that's increasing, not for one particular factor, but for some multiple factors.
It's being more recorded.
Yeah. Well, I think that's debatable. There certainly is more reporting and more recognition.
But, Louise, people weren't recording it. I mean, where was the records in the Victorian era?
There are actually, I mean, a lot of the factors that contribute to sexual abuse are also increasing, so the broad social factors. Now, one of them, I think, would be the sexualisation of children. Now, I think that's where we have to, I think, take the argument back and think, what do we need to do for children's protection? Is there a child protection issue here? Should we be addressing it rather than being apologists for the media and seeing it in a rather narrow way?
It's interesting that if you look at the people who are being found guilty of child sexual abuse, there's patterns there that have nothing to do with the media. You're looking at priests, you're looking at primary school teachers, you're looking at Boy Scout leaders. Those are the patterns. Those are the people who are actually being found guilty of it. Outside of direct familial abuse is what I'm talking about.
I mean, we know the
majority of sexual abuse occurs in families.
Within families, yes. That's right.
Can I also say that
outside of families,
that I think here that one of the reasons that people get, you know, understand... Look, I'm a parent of 2 children. I'm a mother, you know. I mean, I think all sane people are appalled by the sexual abuse of children. How could you not be? But... you know, when we go blaming billboards and advertising and popular culture, I think that's the red herring, because I think what's happening is people are so appalled by the knowledge of the epidemic. I mean, I'm with you. It's unbelievable. It's so frightening that you want to find an external cause, when in fact, as you know, as a psychiatrist, so much of it happens in places where children should be safe. And I mean, the research, as you know, also looks at dysfunctional families, at alcohol and drug abuse, at all of these issues. And my big concern, the only reason I join these debates, is not to be apologists for the media, but to say, are we putting our money and our energy where they should be? Because I can't think of anything worse than a child being sexually abused.
Yes, and I'd say we're probably not putting our money and energy where we should be, and I'd much rather see we had discussions about what we could be doing in a proactive way to protect children.
But, Louise, apart from sexual abuse of young children, the evidence from the American Psychological Association is that it's the confusion, it's the confronting image, it's the fact that it seems to be linked in the evidence to eating disorders. Now, don't we have a pattern here in Australia of a surge of eating disorders? Is there a link?
We do.
Is there a link in this country?
Well, there's an association. There are no doubt other factors contributing to something as complex as ending up with a severe eating disorder, but it certainly is one factor that I think we've clearly identified. And interestingly, if you look at cultures prior to their exposure to some of these images and then look at them after, you see an increase in things like eating disorders and girls having issues with self-esteem and so on. So I think the association's clearly there. But the other point I'd make is that eating disorders are probably one of the, the most striking results, but there are other things going on as well. And one of the most worrying things is the way young girls and women identify and start monitoring themselves, and their sense of identity becomes oriented around particular images in popular culture. I think the issue is not just how the media represent them, it's popular culture as a whole, and the limited vision it gives to young girls and women about what they can be.
Is this your point, Alan, that it is not only media or necessarily advertising, but it is the broader culture that is now portraying women?
I think that, as I say, when we did research into it was actually negative attitudes towards women and what caused them, what we found was that consumption of sexualised media wasn't actually a problem, but it was issues like, for example, religion and the messages it gives about the status of women. It was some of the politicians and the messages they were giving about women belonging in the home. It was the kind of education and the messages that were being given there were actually much more powerful. And also people's families, of course, were very powerful in their messages. And the media wasn't showing up as a really powerful effect there.
That's not what the American Psychological Association says.
No, but they also come with
the American Psychological Association.
We looked at that research and it was actually flawed.
Says I'd be very surprised that research was
flawed. We
but
published it in the International Journal of Sexual Health.
I think this is where you could agree with the APA, because the APA actually says that attitudes towards women which objectify them, which treat them as perpetually sexually available, contribute to violence against women. Those attitudes do contribute to violence, and they've got some very solid evidence in the report for that.
But it tends to be based on laboratory work, which is interesting because the survey work that's done by psychologists actually produces the quite different results.
Alan, we have many young women in the audience tonight, and there's no better laboratory than to go to some of our audience. Are we sexualising women? And what part of our society is responsible for this? Who would like to open up? Yes, sir, in the second row.
I'd like to ask the question of the panel to check where the money flow is. Where I work, I find out that what's important is to follow the dollars. So where are the dollars behind this, and who's behind paying the money that makes this whole thing an issue for our society? And the involvement of corporations, their reason for existence, and what drives the whole program.
Melinda, who profits?
The advertisers, the corporations, the marketers, which have a vested interest in getting girls early, getting their brand loyalty very early. And that's why you've gone from standard women's magazines to now little girls' magazines modelled on the older version, because they'll go from Barbie, Disney Girl, Total Girl to Girlfriend, New Woman, etc. So I think it's all part of the global consumption industry.
I mean, that's absolutely right. And just on Melinda's point, the point is that you make money by giving audiences what they want. That's how capitalism works, is by pandering to audiences, as it were.
Can we put Alan's point to the audience? Is it us? Are we the voyeurs? Yes, the lady.
Well, I think it's interesting that as a society we choose to ban things like, opium. We don't let children drink under the age of 18. We'll ban the advertising of cigarettes. But we do other rules when it's about women and their sexuality and young children.
Catherine, should advertisers be trusted to regulate themselves?
Well, I'm on the Advertising Standards Board, but I'm not speaking with that hat on because I'm not a spokesperson for them. I'm indifferent about that, actually. I mean, I've been part of the self-regulation system for 9 years on a board that's a community service role. And the way that works is that consumers complain to the board, and it has people like Mary Kostakidis and Wendy McCarthy and Thomas Keneally on it. So, it's a board of people, seriously concerned people. And when we look at complaints about advertising, we take it very seriously.
Can we bring that up with the audience? Catherine sits on the advertising board, and many of you would remember that several hundred women complained about an ad that had a woman pole dancing. A man stuffs money into the back of a G-string, and then she goes home and has dinner with the kids, or takes them out for dinner. And the board, if I'm right, overruled those objections. Now, I would like to see, was that decision in line with our societal view? What do you think about that treatment of the woman and the message it sends to young girls about what is normal in our society? Yes.
Well, the woman in that advert was a fully grown woman entitled to a sexuality, so I don't think depriving her of a sexuality, depriving women of sexuality is a modern concept at all. I think it's a step backwards. We're not talking about a child in that case.
Melinda, pole dancing and healthy sexuality, or is that in fact part of the pattern that we don't set a firm standard that represents our community views?
Well, certainly Women's Forum Australia has heard from many, many women across the country who were concerned about that ad, but not only about that ad, other ads that the ASB has ticked off and given the stamp of approval, including a Lee Jeans ad, which shows a very young-looking girl with her legs splayed, half her breast spilling out and sucking on a lollipop. Guess what that's meant to symbolise? So we don't think actually that the ASB is reflective of broad community standards. And we do think the Nando's ad was demeaning to women and presenting the woman sticking her bum in the man's face and him paying her. And in terms of children, a lot of children did see that ad. It was shown during Pirates of the Caribbean in the school holidays. And despite what the Nando's Corporation said about that it wasn't intended for children, it was shown when children could see it. And I think it's, again, just part of this whole attitude of objectifying women in advertising and more broadly.
I'm not sure how... I mean, I have a couple of friends who do pole dancing. One's an academic and one's a businesswoman. I'm not sure that they'd be happy for you to tell them that they shouldn't do that.
Well, if they're sticking their bums on television, it might be different than if they're pole dancing in the privacy of their own home.
But let's be clear about this. This was an M-rated time, Jeff. As a board, and I'm sure there are lots of decisions... I mean, often if we ban something, we get criticised. If we don't ban something, we get criticised. That's the nature of that kind of decision-making process.
And what have you banned lately, Catherine?
Oh, the last meeting I was at, 6 ads, actually. So there will always be different views, and I guess the other thing you could replace the ASB with is a government panel on which you'd also have people with subjective opinions who, under government regulation, would be banning or not banning things. So when I say I'm indifferent to the system, what I mean is I think you're always going to come back to a group of subjective people trying to make serious judgment calls about this stuff. But I've got to say, if you're talking about something that's M-rated or MA-rated, I don't believe that we should reduce all of popular culture and all of advertising to G-rated material. And very briefly, the Nando's ad, which showed a pole dancing mum, I think that a lot of the objections to that was the idea that you saw this woman in a business suit who then did pole dancing for a living, which is a perfectly legal occupation, and then was shown with a happy family eating chicken. And I think a lot of the objection was, oh, how could this dreadful sort of slutty person be a mum and be someone who wears a suit? Well, a lot of them are.
Can we hear from our audience? Are you happy, or do you find some of these images unacceptable? Yes, the lady in the second row.
Firstly, I think women are totally exploited sexually, and I think it'd be different if we saw the shoe on the other foot. Where do we have the men pole dancing for us and all this sort of thing? We need to realise that this needs to be a balanced society. We have the male energy, which is the yang, and the yin, which is the female energy. How do we create life? Through male and females together, creating the one.
So a double standard?
It is a double standard, of course. Yes, we're sexual beings, and this brings a lovely role between a man and a woman, and that's the way it should be. And it's very sad what we're doing to our children.
Melinda, isn't this what we mean by objectification, sexualisation, is that a young girl is trained to think that her whole being is about sex?
Yes, there's an embedding of sexual content in every aspect of the culture now. And everyone says, well, why can't the parents just say no? But it's impossible. It's the billboards, the internet, the music videos. It's just everywhere. And, I mean, we're all for healthy sexuality and healthy sexual relationships. But at the moment, we don't think that the way women are being presented, the objectification of women, is healthy and is good for relationships.
I think you have to remember as well, though, that I think you're wrong to say that everything is about sexualisation, and things have obviously changed in other ways for women in the past 30 years. I've been looking at old episodes of Four Corners, the current affairs show from the 60s. You would never have a panel like this because you would have 4 men in suits.
Sure.
There's now a stage. So there's now women now have a number of messages, not just the sexualisation, which is what it used to be all about. You will be there for your husband and that's it. Women now have messages about sexualisation as well as messages about profession, about community work, about self-fulfilment. You can have someone like yourself coming in and talking in public. There's all these different possibilities. And I agree absolutely that we need to see more men pole dancing.
And can I just add to that really quickly?